Well, hello, Nativity Bibleheads. It is Dr. Wayne, and it is time for Bible Study Wednesday, August 18 edition. We are in 2 Kings chapter 11 today. A lot of political intrigue going on here. We've just gotten finished with chapter 10, which was the big revolution of Jehu in the northern kingdom. Well, chapter 11 turns attention to the southern kingdom. And there's a couple of things of a backdrop that we have to talk about first before we get into chapter 11. And one of which, and not the least of which, is the promise of an eternal line of the king of King David, right? When we talk back in chapter 8, verse 19, it said, "Yet the Lord would not destroy Judah for the sake of his servant David, since he had promised to give a lamp to him and to his descendants forever." One thing we got to keep in mind, just because the Judean kings were all Davidic, they were not all faithful. They are not necessarily the best kings. Some of them introduced Baal worship and syncretized the Yahweh worship. But the promise is an expression of God's grace in that even though they weren't faithful, God was faithful. If we look at, there was a marriage alliance in chapter 18, or chapter 8, where it says, okay, here's chapter 8, verse 16. This is all background to understand chapter 11, okay? In the 5th year of King Joram, son of Ahab of Israel, Jehoram, son of King Jehoshaphat of Judah, began to reign. Remember, anytime we're talking about a king of Judah, we're talking about a Davidic king, right? Well, Jehoram, he was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. He walked in the way of the kings of Israel. That's a bad thing, okay? The kings of Israel all walked in the ways of Baal because of the Baal worship that was allowed in, as the house of Ahab had done. For the daughter of Ahab was his wife. Okay, we are not told this woman's name yet, but she plays a prominent role in chapter 11, okay? So this Davidic king, Jehoram, marries this daughter of Ahab to be his wife. Her name is Athaliah, okay? Athaliah being the queen, Jehoram dies, and Ahaziah, her son, takes the throne. He is buddy-buddy with the king of the north, Joram. When Jehu starts cleaning house, Jehu kills Joram, and at that time they were actually physically close. They were like in proximity to each other. So back in chapter 9, verse 27, it says, "When King Ahaziah of Judah saw this," what he saw was the king of the north getting killed by Jehu, "he fled in the direction of Beth-Hagan. Jehu pursued him, shouting, 'Shoot him also!' And they shot him in the chariot at the ascent of Gur, which is by Ibleam. Then he fled to Megiddo and died there. His officers carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in his tomb with his ancestors in the city of David." Okay, so now with Ahaziah dead, his mother, his mother is the one who stands to gain the throne. And remember, she was not of the line of David. She was not a Davidite, okay? Now, look at chapter 11, verse 1. "Now when Athaliah, Ahaziah's mother, saw that her son was dead, she set out to destroy all the royal family." So she is plotting a coup to take over the Davidic kingship in Judah. But Jehosheba, King Joram's daughter, King Joram was the deceased king of the northern kingdom, Ahaziah's sister, okay, so Ahaziah So Athaliah was Ahaziah's mother, but Ahaziah's sister, which would have been one of either a daughter or a half-daughter, or maybe a stepdaughter even to Athaliah. Ahaziah's sister took Joash, son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the king's children who were about to be killed. So Athaliah knew that there was a male heir, her grandson, Joash, and she was plotting to have them all killed so that the throne would be hers, and she's not a Davidite, okay? Not only is she not a Davidite, but she is kin to the pagan family in the idea of our narrator. She is a pagan and a Baal worshiper, and she is promoted that kind of thing. So she is looked upon as an anomaly, as somebody who didn't belong, a downright, an illegitimate usurper of the throne, if you will. Okay, so she's got this plot to, okay, if I just get all my grandsons killed and all of my son, like the idea is to wipe everybody out so that she's the only claimant to the throne, right? Well, she put him and his nurse in a bedroom. Okay, now we're talking about who? Ahaziah's sister, okay? We don't have her name right here. No, yeah, we do, Jehosheba. Her name is Jehosheba. But Jehosheba, King Joram's daughter, King Joram was from Israel, the northern kingdom. Ahaziah's sister, Ahaziah was the king from the south who had been killed, whose mother was Athaliah, took Joash, son of Ahaziah, Joash is the rightful heir to the throne, and stole him away from the king's children who were about to be killed. She put him and his nurse in a bedroom. So she basically stole him away and hid him with a nurse who, and back then a nurse was more than just what we think of, some people will think of as somebody in white shoes and white support hose and a white hat. No, actually a nursemaid even, somebody to actually feed him because he was a baby. She hid him from Athaliah so that he was not killed. He remained with her 6 years, hidden in the house of the Lord, while Athaliah reigned over the land. We're not told what other heirs there were, possibly to be killed. We don't know if he was the only heir. We just know that this is all that this is all that the narrator tells us. So what we have here is a crisis of the promise. The promise is to David that there would always be a Davidic heir on the line, and there's a legitimate problem here because there's no one of age, and there was a plot to overthrow, and this Athaliah is not a Davidite, but yet she actually reigns 6 years. How is this a fulfillment of the promise? Well, stay tuned. He remained with her 6 years, hidden in the house of the Lord, while Athaliah reigned over the land. But in the 7th year, Jehoiada was a priest, okay? We've heard of Jehoiada prior to this. He was in that company with Nathan and other prophets, that family of prophets, if you will. But in the 7th year, Jehoiada summoned the captains of the Karites and of the guards. Who were the Karites? We don't know. There could be some sort of a royal guard. We've never heard them mentioned before. We have heard the Cherethites mentioned and the Perizzites or the Philistines. David had a couple of battalions of royal guards that were made up of people who weren't necessarily Israelite. This could be them, or It could be an elite group of a security force, like from the island of Crete, because a Karaite could be somebody from Crete. We're not sure exactly, but whatever they were on the side of the priest Jehoiada. But in the 7th year, Jehoiada summoned the captains of the Karites and of the guards and had them come to him in the house of the Lord. That's the temple. Well, yeah, the temple. He made a covenant. Yeah. He made a covenant with them and put them under oath in the house of the Lord. Then he showed them the king's son. This reminds me of that scene from the Danny Kaye movie back in was it the 60s? I don't know. I can't remember when it was. Something about the Purple Pimpernel. Right. I can remember seeing Danny Kaye take this baby around, and the proof that he was the heir to the throne was he had this birthmark, and it's called the Purple Pimpernel, something like on his baby's little hip, and he would like flash it to them, and they would like, oh, and they would deign to it. This is what that kind of reminds me of. Yeah, check it out. It's a good movie, The Purple Pimpernel. He made a covenant with them and put them under oath in the house of the Lord. Then he showed them the king's son. This is little baby Joash. He commanded them, this is what you are to do. 1/3 of you, those who go off duty on the Sabbath and guard the king's house, another 1/3 being at the gate sur, and 1/3 at the gate behind the guards, you shall guard the palace. And your 2 divisions that come on duty in force on the Sabbath and guard the house of the Lord shall surround the king, each with weapons in hand, and whoever approaches the ranks is to be killed. Be with the king in his comings and goings. So notice how Jehoiada refers to this baby Joash as the king. Even though he hasn't been publicly acclaimed king, he's been in hiding, but as for his survival, it is time now to bring him forth. And he has this elaborate plan, and it includes a lot of people and a lot of armed people. And it's like, we are not letting anything go wrong here. It's like, this was a very planned out thing by the priest, who undoubtedly is aware of the Davidic promise and feels as though it's necessary for him to take steps to ensure that this happens, that this is what God wants. And he makes this, operationally speaking, this is a huge plan. I don't understand it all. I think the reason why we have all the details is to get the meticulosity, is that a word? Meticulousness of the planning that went into making sure that nothing goes wrong here. I mean, it's not that difficult to kill a 6-7-year-old boy. It's not that difficult. But when you're armed to the teeth around him, then yeah, a little difficult. Verse 9, the captains did according to all that the priest Jehoiada commanded. Each brought his men who were to go off duty on the Sabbath with those who were to come on duty on the Sabbath, and came to the priest Jehoiada. A lot of people. The priest delivered to the captains the spears and shields that had been King David's. Now these are very important symbols, because symbolically this is, remember, this is the Davidic king, and the fact that that we would have something that was actually of the possession of King David, it would add to the legitimacy of the claim, to make sure that nobody said, well, how do we know that's the right baby, right? It's valid, but he plays this PR way very cleanly, in that he makes sure that all the accoutrements are there to check all the boxes in people's heads, so they know, oh yeah, this is an heir of David. The priest delivered to the captains the spears and shields that had been King David's, which were in the house of the Lord. The guards stood, every man with his weapons in his hand, from the south side of the house to the north side of the house, around the altar and the house, to guard the king on every side. So again, the narrator is already referring to little baby Joash as the king, even though he hasn't been publicly proclaimed king. This is a crisis of the promise being fulfilled. The promise must be fulfilled, so therefore all of this, these actions are necessary. Now, it begs the question, though, of like, okay, well, if it's God's promise, why don't we just let God take care of it all? Well, apparently, the operational plan included all of this, because God didn't just, have everybody drop dead and follow the command of baby Joash and say, yes, this baby is king. See how everybody falls dead around him? Well, no, that didn't happen. Sometimes you need a little help from your friends. Well, this is what's going on. Verse 12. Then he brought out the king's son, little baby Joash, put the crown on him, and gave him the covenant. That word is the word for treaty or testimony. In Hebrew, it's eduth. It could be a piece of a scroll of authority. Okay, they proclaimed him king and anointed him. This is what you do when you always got to anoint. You always got to pour the oil over the head. It had not been done. A lot of times we see in the book of Kings the next king being anointed in secret. But no, not this one. No anointing in secret. It's not done until it's done publicly. They proclaimed him king and anointed him. They clapped their hands and shouted, "Long live the king!" How do you know you're king? When people do this around you. How do you really know you're king? You know you're king when people shout with your head being oily, with olive oil, "Long live the king!" That's how you know you're king. That's how everybody knows you're king. Verse 13, when Athaliah, remember who Athaliah was? Athaliah was not the boy's mother, but the boy's grandmother, okay? When Athaliah heard the noise of the guard and of the people, she went into the house of the Lord to the people. When she looked, there was the king, little baby Joash, standing by the pillar, according to custom, with the captains and trumpeters beside the king. So it's funny how after all that weird stuff happened in the northern kingdom of the revolution of Jehu in taking over the kingship, where this is like really is happening the way it's supposed to. There's no blood, there's no revolution. It's just simply a proclamation of, well, this is the rightful heir, and it's like all the boxes are getting checked as far as legitimacy is concerned. So there is no bloodshed here. But wait, there might be. Then there was the king standing by the pillar, according to custom, with the captains and the trumpeters beside the king. Oh, like trumpeters. Wouldn't you just love to have trumpeters standing beside you? And all the people of the land rejoicing and blowing trumpets. Well, that means game over. Game over for Athaliah and her plan to reign. Remember, she had reigned while little baby Joash was in hiding, but that time is over, and she certainly knows that means that her death is drawing nigh. Because remember, she was considered an anomaly, a heinous anomaly at that. Because why? Well, she was of the family of the northern king, of the Jezebelians and the Baal worshippers and all of that. Verse 14b. Athaliah tore her clothes and cried, "Treason! Treason!" I guess that's what you do when you know that the game's up. Verse 15, then the prophet Jehoiada commanded the captains who were set over the army, "Bring her out between the ranks and kill with the sword anyone who follows her." We're not really told that there's a whole lot of people who follow her. For the priest said, "Let her not be killed in the house of the Lord." Oh, they're so being proper, and it's like, oh yes, well, if there is to be death, it cannot be here. Make sure it's outside the gates of the temple. Thank you very much. Verse 16. So they laid hands on her. Well, this is called violent hands. In the Bible, we have laying hands. There's laying hands and there's laying of hands. This is the laying of hands that are laying violent hands. She went through the horse's entrance to the king's house, and there, the horse's entrance. That's interesting. Well, that's probably because there weren't any guards there, I guess. I don't know. And there she was put to death as she went through there. Wow. Whew. Her coup was over. Jehoiada, verse 17, made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people that they should be the Lord's people. Also between the king and the people. Okay, we already did the king and the people, between the Lord and the king and the people, that they should be, and also between the king and the people. Huh? Okay, we got a three-way covenant and a two-way covenant. Verse 18, then all the people of the land went to the house of Baal and tore it down. Remember the Baal thing in Jehu's revolution in the northern kingdom, where he called all the worshipers of Baal to come to the house, and he was going to do a sacrifice like no other, and he ends up slaughtering all of them? Well, look at this. Then all the people of the land went to the house of Baal and tore it down. Notice there's no death here. It's just the destruction of a building. His altars and his images they broke in pieces, and they killed Mattan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. So we do have a symbolic killing. It's like we had a symbolic killing with the usurper Athaliah, and now symbolic killing of just the priest here. Killed Mattan, the priest of Baal, before the priest posted guards over the house of the Lord. He took the captains, the Karites, the guards, and all the people of the land. Then they brought the king down from the house of the Lord, marching through the gate of the guards of the king's house. He took his seat on the throne of the kings. So all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet after Athaliah had been killed with the sword at the king's house. So this is like the denouement of the coup. After that, the killing of, so there's only two people that die: Athaliah and Mattan. The Athaliah, who was she was the woman who had let Baal worship promulgate in Judah, and now the Baal priest. So the Baal worship in Judah was still very strong. And we got to remember that wasn't a problem just of the northern kingdom. It's also something that was a problem in the southern kingdom. So that's the way it all ends. So all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet. The city was quiet after Athaliah had been killed with the sword at the king's house. Not at the temple, at the king's house. Very important. Joash was 7 years old when he began to reign. So that's the story of how little baby Joash, sometimes referred to as Jehoash, comes to the throne in Judah. That's all the farther we're going to go today. We're going to get into that his reign a little bit more next week in chapter 12. But this coup attempt by Athaliah is in contrast to what had happened in the northern kingdom with Jehu. Jehu, remember, had been anointed as the one who was to be king, and then he goes and takes that as a license to kill everybody in his path, and he does, and it's a very bloody one. This one in the southern kingdom is much more according to form, according to, okay, well, this was supposed to happen, this was supposed to happen, this was supposed to happen. And it's not tremendously bloody. We just have the usurper die and we have the Baal priest die. That's it. And so it's much more something that is what would be called normal in terms of transference of power. The contrast is supposed to have us see. Our narrator favors the southern kingdom, okay? He's very much more pro-Judah than he is pro-Israel. He was happy to describe Jehu and his bloody revolution that he effected in the north, which included killing this king of the south. But in talking of the reign of the problems that they had to continue the Davidic line, it's much more genteel, it's much more according to form. It's not something that is heinous and violent. It's just a lot of planning and a lot of using the proper kind of symbology and getting the people on the side of what is happening. So it's much more according to the way it's supposed to be. So our narrator is trying for us to see how the Judean king, even though they weren't 100% on board with Yahweh because of the Baal worship that had been introduced, that they are more proper, I guess is the way to say it. So that's it for today. Don't have much for you there. The Davidic kingship was in peril. It gets rescued by a great operations plan and by the men of God, the priests and the loyal people to the throne. And that crisis is averted. And so technically speaking, I mean, he was king, although the baby was king, but he wasn't. There is like a 6-year period where Athaliah was in charge. And it kind of does beg the question, well, why didn't somebody try to overthrow her? It probably has a lot to do with the fact that Judah at that time was not very strong. Judah was experiencing a time of weakness, and so it really wasn't seen as like that big of a prize to be had. Very possible that that's the case. Remember, this was during a time of the northern kingdom, the kingdoms to the north of the northern kingdom, and the kingdoms to the south of the southern kingdom, Egypt, were in there. Sometimes they were strong and sometimes they were weak, and sometimes that meant that they had peace in Judah and Israel simply because the other places were too busy to look to them. This could be an example of that. That's one of the reasons why there was no vacuum. It could beg the question, why wasn't this vacuum of power filled in by some power from around there? Well, maybe they were in too much of a turmoil themselves from what they had going on. Very possibly. But the crisis of the Davidic line is over, and we do have little baby Joash taken over as king, and so life is good, and the promise of the Lord abides, and that's the bottom line of this chapter of 2 Kings, chapter 11. So I'll see you next week with 2 Kings chapter 12. Until then, shalom.